In today's video, I'm going to cover BlackBerry stock because they did have the Wolfe Auto conference on February 12th. I'm going to go over the key points, go a little bit over the technicals, share my opinions and thoughts, and then mention something about the earnings as well. But I do have a replay of that conference as well. Highly encourage you to watch it because in case I might have missed some of the key points as well, that way you get the full picture basically. And at the same time, if you do find this video beneficial, consider dropping a like towards the end. Helps out the channel, so thank you so much for that. And then also another thing is given that it's tax season, Free Tax USA, the software is for free and you could file your federal taxes for free, but the state tax is $15. I have a description or a link down in the description below. I do get a small kickback from it. It does support the channel, but no extra cost to you. It's the exact same software as TurboTax basically for the most part, same setup as you go through it. I've used them in the past and I did a comparison the same year where I compared Free Tax USA with TurboTax and it came out to the same refund. The only difference is obviously you don't pay for the software, so that's good. Federal filing is technically free with TurboTax, but you pay for it with the software. That's what it is. But then the state filing is $20 for TurboTax if you file early, and then $25 if you file closer to the filing date. Whereas opposed to Free Tax USA, it's $15 the whole entire time. So there's that. So if you're interested in that, there's a description down below. Again, that does support the channel, so thank you so much for that. I do appreciate it. No additional charges to you guys at all. Now, in terms of the key takeaways, so seems like QNX is BlackBerry's main focus, #1 capital allocation. So I found that interesting, even though BlackBerry still has a secure communications division after the Cylance sale. Then they also mentioned that QNX originally was just an operating system, but they have expanded it. And even though they don't need to compete with Linux due to the lack of functional safety that Linux has or doesn't have, which puts Linux out of the picture in terms of direct competition, BlackBerry is aiming at being the best performance operating system and the top to compete with regards of safety out of the picture in terms of the goal is Linux in terms of just the operating system. This is not regards to the sales, just in terms of operating system performance outside of meeting functional safety levels that are asked of, all while maintaining real-time attributes for things like ADAS applications, which is self-driving systems. And then they talked about the $850 million backlog number. They will be updating that soon. They didn't state this, but I think in the past they've updated it about two weeks prior to the earnings conference call, which reminds me, I'm going to a little bit jump ship in terms of topics for a sec. Quick reminder, earnings date estimated April 2nd, 2025 for Q4 earnings for fiscal year 2025. I still have to have that video come out. Obviously, I'll have it out before the earnings. I'm hoping in the next week and a half, I'll have it out. What you could expect for their earnings, forward outlooks, all stuff in terms of comparisons as well with analyst expectations and expectations they've provided, so on and so forth. So if you're interested in that video, and also interested to when I live stream the conference call as well, which I do about 5-10 minutes before the conference call, go over the numbers that get released before the conference call begins in terms of the numbers, like the Q4 numbers get released. I do a comparison usually on the call and about a quarter-over-quarter comparison, year-over-year comparison, all that stuff, and compare it to analyst expectations. If you're interested in all that in terms of the post and the live stream, consider following and subscribing so you'll be notified when I do post those videos and live stream. Thanks again for the support. I do appreciate it. Now, and they also, in terms of the backlog, so back to the program, in terms of the backlog, again, $850 million and growing substantially too. They're going to update it, so most likely, in my opinion, 2 weeks before the earnings or on the earnings itself. They also did break down how the payment portion of the royalties come about basically. So in terms of design win, let's just say they got a design win and the whole life cycle of that whole entire design win is about 100% payment, or but it is 100% payment. Well, the first 20% of the design win is for the development kit / tools that they provide. Then the 20% after that is for engineering services. This is about 2 to 3 years. Then every car ships out, they get a royalty from that. And that's about 60% of the design win. And that's the backlog we're looking at. So the $850 million is that 60% portion. And it is high margin, basically about 100% margin, which is awesome. So for the most part, if, for example, OEMs or whoever got these design wins, for the most part, it's OEMs, obviously, if they invested for about 40%, there's a good chance they're continuing on that 60% portion. And and hopefully most of it comes in. And again, that backlog is growing substantially as well at the same time. And that portion is predominantly high margin, basically about 100%. Amazing stuff. Then platform talk, they talked about QNX platform talks, possible subscription ideas, and then platform will help compete with open source. One thing to mention as well, while I'm going through this, just bear in mind I do own shares in the company, so be aware of that while you're watching this video. And I'm not a professional, so please do your own due diligence and research before buying and selling. Then they mentioned that they are getting bigger design wins than in the past, so that's always awesome because that translates essentially, for the most part, revenue growth, right? So if they're getting bigger design wins than in the past, then we could essentially hope and expect that revenue will be climbing. And then especially since they've cut costs recently and seem to want to do so a little bit more as well as we go forward, and they're in the profitable side, then technically with the margins low, revenue coming in, it's a good amount of profits could be coming in versus, for example, if cost was higher and then revenue comes in as well, increasing, but if cost and revenue is pretty much the same ballpark, then slim margins and then profits is not really coming in essentially, right? Which will reflect in the share price as well. So you want profits and so on and so forth, so the share price could climb up substantially in a way. Then BlackBerry is providing the platform / software that OEMs are asking BlackBerry to create products to sell to them. A little bit of not the greatest structure for in terms of grammar, but this was mentioned in the past as well, and I'm going to elaborate what was meant by this. Essentially, OEMs are coming to BlackBerry and asking them, can you provide us with this kind of products and services? So from that, essentially software actually, like products, right? So it's great that they're coming to them as opposed to, for example, in the past, it was predominantly BlackBerry going to the OEM saying, we have this product, would you be interested in it? But now, basically what's happening is at the same time, while BlackBerry's doing that, the OEMs are coming to them and saying, can you provide us with this kind of product, which is awesome. Then the car software demand, it was mentioned that the car software demand is growing. So basically QNX business is also naturally growing. Again, that's like the software demand. So the applications in terms of the vehicles, what they do, since that's growing, you could expect the nature of QNX to grow as well. And then in terms of capital allocation for QNX, it's mainly for the verticals outside of automotive. They've mentioned this in the past, essentially where they're automotive heavy for the time being, and they have expanded in terms of medical and then like the robotics side as well, partnership with AMD. But the capital allocation seems to be in the future going to be more focused for the verticals outside of automotive, right? And they've touched base on this before too as well, where in the future and technically now, because QNX is growing, it's going to get to a point that last year's sales, or let's say 2 years ago sales, not specifically right now, but in terms of as we go move forward, previous year sales at one point will be combined with future vehicle sales. So let's just say arbitrary numbers. Last year they sold 100,000 vehicles in terms of OEMs, just random number, right? And then this year they sold 50,000. Obviously a decline in auto sales, so technically it's a headwind. But with the combination of how QNX is going and then potential royalties coming in per vehicle, then you could look at it as not just 50,000 for BlackBerry's revenue this year, but more so 100 from last year plus 50,000 from this year, total of 150,000 combined coming in for that year. It would still not be beneficial to see that drop because ideally you would want to see 100,000 from last year plus let's say 110,000 from this year for growth. So you see combined of 210,000 versus 150,000, but it would not essentially hit BlackBerry's bottom line that substantially. You'd still see growth, if that makes sense, right? That's essentially what they want to get to for the most part. And then QNX, they was asked about QNX in terms of the Chinese market and all that stuff, and then competition as well. So in terms of competition, QNX is 3 to 5 years ahead in terms of China competition, but since China has a lot of OEMs in the country competing relatively quickly, they skip the safety side. If the car is not considered for export sales, so QNX to be less used in those types of vehicles. So, and then they were asked like in terms of someone can catch up to QNX. So can someone catch up to QNX? And they said, yes, like anything else out there, obviously naturally if any other people could catch up to something, even though it's a certain distance far ahead kind of thing. But the company is more concerned about tariffs and selling in China. And to me, the fact that they are more focused on that, then that shows to me, and this is just my opinion. Again, be mindful, I do own shares in the company, so be aware of that while you're watching this and I'm not professional and all that stuff. But if they're more focused on that, either they're messing up or, which I'm taking as most likely is the case, is they're so far ahead that that is not the concern right now. And the reason why I'm thinking that is because they said they're 3 to 5 years ahead. So if that's the case, then I think it's the latter point where they are so far ahead that is not a concern. And the tariffs, which a viewer commented, thanks for commenting because I agree with your viewpoint here, commented and I agree with him about how Canada isn't having issues with China. So overall, there won't be a concern for that front in terms of the tariff side. So if that's their concern, I think that's a good sign that they're relatively really well off in terms of how far ahead they are in terms of QNX, in terms of software, and the competition necessarily can't catch up. For the time being, obviously, anything can change out of nowhere, but I don't see it as much of a concern, and they more focus on the tariff side kind of shows it to be the case more so as well. More so, even though the fact that they already mentioned 3 to 5 years ahead, if that makes sense. Then was asked with the extra cash BlackBerry has, what they might plan to do. And then they basically answered with some merger and acquisition, which they mentioned before, for QNX side, or share buyback, or maybe possibly some dividends, which is amazing. So the reason why I like that dividends was mentioned, personally, I think we're too early into the game in terms of how much cash they have on hand to do dividends. I do own shares of the company. It would be nice to get dividends, but I don't think necessarily this is the greatest play for the time being. I would prefer more of the share buyback, or maybe mergers, acquisitions, combination of both, so on and so forth. It just depends. The reason I'm saying or mergers, acquisitions, it just depends on the merger and acquisition. I don't want them to just buy up small companies and do merger and acquisitions and they don't bear fruit that much, right? So I don't want them to just jump into anything. But those two options or a combination of both is more preferable in my opinion. But the one thing I do like a lot is the fact that dividends was even mentioned. The reason why this more solidifies to me that this new management team is doing a phenomenal job, moving way faster overall in terms of this is in a way like a completely different, not completely different, but substantially a more efficient company than it was, let's just say like a year, 2 years ago, if that makes sense. Because BlackBerry, I can't remember if they ever mentioned dividends in the past personally. And I've held the stock for quite some time. So this is amazing. Love that it was even mentioned, even though I still think it's early into the game to have dividends. Still would be nice, but I would prefer the other options personally. And again, with share buybacks is pretty awesome too, because the share price should rise nonetheless. Plus, another thing is too, we're seeing analysts increase their what is called, lack of a better term right now for the time being, but increasing their estimates. That's what it is in terms of share price and all that stuff, and that's always a good sign. So the company's moving in a great direction. We're seeing volume increases, all that stuff. So great conference. And right now there's nothing in terms of press releases that really essentially came out in terms of events as well. But yeah, I'll keep you guys posted as we go move forward. But now the next thing is in terms of technicals, which one thing is, before I get into it fully, this week is a little bit of an eventful week for the markets. We have, for example, GDP numbers coming out. We have PCE inflation numbers. So GDP numbers come out, if I remember correctly, it's on the Thursday. And we got PCE inflation numbers coming out on the Friday. Plus we have NVIDIA reporting earnings on the Wednesday. So we got Wednesday jam-packed, Thursday jam-packed, and Friday jam-packed. And the market's relatively, for the most part, is kind of pointing to the downside. I have to revisit it, double check, so don't quote me on that portion. But the good thing is though, we saw the markets go down today, and yet BlackBerry still went up. So it went up 2.29%. We even hit $5.50 at one point. This is the US ticker symbol BB, so US currency. And for example, S&P went down, give or take, about 0.5%. And then NASDAQ went down 1.2%, give or take. And the Dow Jones was slightly above at 0.08%. But BlackBerry did pretty well. Now, obviously, the markets went back and forth. Like there was at one point there was green within the day and then dropped down significantly. But BlackBerry did really well and recovered pretty well with massive volumes coming in. Now, the question is where we headed now for the most part. I'm just going to bring this down a little bit lower. Now, in terms of the 1 year, 5 year, and all chart, it kind of looks like we have more strength to the upside. And the reason why I'm saying that is, so if you look at the MACD line right here, it is in the bearish movement. Technically, you could expect more downside, which it is possible, but I think we're still headed up and we're going to have issues basically passing the $6 price point. I'll get to that as to why. But we saw a massive volume uptick and more to the buy side. So even though we're in the bearish movement, in my opinion, this is just my opinion, I think it's going to be just short-lived for the most part. The problem is we do have headwinds in the market coming in, which is like I stated, for example, NVIDIA. I think personally, I haven't looked at NVIDIA completely in terms of charts and everything. I just know there's a lot of orders that have come in for NVIDIA overall as the time goes by for AI chips. So I don't think it's going to be a disaster, but don't quote me on that because I haven't followed NVIDIA quite a bit enough to know for sure, right? But that will move the markets because it is a high market cap. Just to quickly look at it, in terms of market cap, I believe it's a 2-point-something trillion market cap, or 3.19 trillion market cap. So quite significant. So if it does drop or go up high, it could essentially move the markets, right? Especially for the S&P and NASDAQ. But there's that. Now, with the high volume coming in with the buy side, I think this might be short-lived. The 5-year chart is in the bullish movement, and the new data point that came in, it is not necessarily, it's still coming in, so we don't know if it's higher than the previous data that came in, but it is on more on the buy side for the time being, and we are challenging the 200-day moving average of the 5-year chart. So currently right now it's about $5.40, which if you remember within the trading day today, we did pass it a couple times, but there's a lot between from where we're at right now to the $6 price point. I'm going to go through them soon. So there is going to be a lot of resistance, in my opinion, just because given the headwinds from the market is not necessarily the week that essentially will pass through it. Are we going to head higher? In my opinion, yeah, especially with how the management team is moving currently. And there's always that possibility, I believe I mentioned in the last video, given how fast they moved with the silent sale. This is not guaranteed. So don't bank on it because essentially it's a gamble if you bank on it. I'm more speaking to the option traders for this one because it doesn't necessarily will happen. But since they moved so fast with silence deal, like it came in quickly, they sold it quickly, the deal closed off quickly, pretty impressive, way faster than past performance in terms of how BlackBerry used to move. Given that, and share buyback has been mentioned a bunch of times, if share buyback actually does come in play, let's just say before earnings, that would, regardless, in my opinion, regardless of the market's headwinds and all stuff, would break through. I'm not saying necessarily that it would be this week or anything, but I'm just saying before earnings, then it would actually jump significantly, in my opinion, right? So break through the barriers that I'm going to mention about. But the only thing is, though, again, I would not bank on it, right? It's not guaranteed, and like basically don't gamble. That's what I'm trying to state. Anything's possible, but just don't gamble. But things like that could break through the resistance levels quite significantly, or some good news. Essentially what I'm saying is great news, right? And all that stuff. So yeah, bullish movement in the MAC line, volume data coming in as more on the buy side for the time being, and the 200-day moving average is at 540, which is good because when it passes it, technically it triggers some more purchases from others in terms of if they're watching those technicals, right? And then the all chart, bullish movement, strong volume overall, buy side. And then we're looking at the 50-day and 100-day moving average of the all chart, and we're looking at 580 and 693 respectively. Now, the reason why I'm saying we're going to be stuck for under $6 for quite some time, unless some news comes in or headwinds are going to affect it as well from the markets, is, for example, like I stated, the 580 for the all chart, the 540 for the 5-year chart for the 200-day moving average. And if you look at the 1 month, I believe, no, not the 1 month. 1 month is showing bearish movement crossover to the downside, but we could see support potentially on 50-day moving average at 534, but that's not the main concern I was looking at, right about here. So this is the 3-month chart, and it's in the bullish movement, but you could see we have headwinds on the moving averages colliding with a 200-day and 50-day moving average combined at 548 and 551 respectively. So we'll see some, like we saw, for example, today, 550 was quite a decent amount of resistance, right? And then at the 100-day moving average is at 570. And then at the 6-month, we have resistance with the 100-day and 50-day moving average at 570 or 554 for the 100-day and 570 for the 50-day. So in my opinion, I think it's going to be a little bit difficult to essentially break through the $6 zone, like getting to the $6 zone and then breaking through the $6 zone that we saw earlier. Are we going to do it? I think so. At one point, for sure. In my opinion, again, I do own shares in the company, so be aware of that. But it's just given the market headwinds a little bit, plus the moving averages limitations, plus the resistances and all that stuff like vertical resistance levels. It's going to be a little bit challenging unless some news comes in, or unless by the time we get to earnings, which most likely is going to be pretty good earnings. Again, I have to look through the numbers fully, but we had the silent sale numbers coming in as well within that earnings, about $120 million, if I'm not mistaken, in terms of the number. But that's basically it for today's video. Hopefully you guys liked it. If you did, consider dropping a like. It does help the channel, so thank you so much for that again. And if you want to be notified when I do upload those videos and live stream, consider following and subscribing. Thanks again for watching. Take care. God bless and peace.